This is the moment that changes the entire second half of Demon Slayer. Kyojuro Rengoku, the Flame Hashira, fights a upper-ranked demon alone through the night, protects 200 sleeping passengers, and dies right as the sun comes up, seconds after the only thing that could have saved him arrives too late. That death is the emotional engine for almost everything that happens afterward. Tanjiro's resolve hardens. The Hashira realize how outmatched they actually are. The stakes of the entire back half of the story get redefined around one simple fact. Even the strongest of them can lose. So today, we're asking the question a lot of fans have asked since the moment this arc ended. What if Rengoku survived? Not, what if he won easily? What if the fight went just differently enough that he walked away? We're going to trace that change all the way through to the ending, training, family, the final war, all of it. Heads up, this entire video is built around major manga and movie spoilers. If you haven't finished the story, some of what's coming will spoil the ending. Let's get into it. Quick recap, because the what if only works if we're precise about the real version first. Akaza attacks the Mugen Train, while Rengoku is on duty protecting the passengers. The fight runs for hours through the night, and Rengoku fights it essentially alone, refusing to retreat because retreating means letting Akaza kill everyone on the train behind him. Akaza, partway through, offers him something the story treats as a real, serious offer. Become a demon, gain that power permanently. Stop aging, stop dying. Rengoku refuses immediately, without hesitation, and the reason he gives becomes one of the most quoted lines in the entire franchise. Humans get their meaning, specifically, because life is finite. As dawn approaches, Akaza is forced to retreat because sunlight kills demons. But by then, the damage is already done. Rengoku dies from his wounds just after the sun rises, surrounded by Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu, having held the line the entire night. That's the real version. Now let's change one variable. For this to work, we don't get to change Rengoku's skill, his resolve, or Akaza's power. Those are fixed points in the story, and changing them would just make this a different, less interesting story. The one variable that actually makes sense to shift is timing and support. In canon, Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu are fighting a separate demon inside the train and can't reach Rengoku until the very end of his fight. And even then, they arrive too exhausted and too late to meaningfully help. If that fight inside the train resolves faster, say 10 to 15 minutes earlier, the three of them reach Akaza with enough time and enough strength left to actually change the outcome of the fight, not just witness the end of it. That's a small, believable change. It doesn't erase the danger. It doesn't make Rengoku invincible. It just gives him backup slightly before the fight becomes unwinnable instead of slightly after. With backup arriving early, Akaza is forced to split his attention between Rengoku and 3 additional fighters, one of whom, Tanjiro, is already showing flashes of sun-breathing potential even at this early point in the story. Akaza doesn't lose easily here. He's still an upper-ranked demon and still far stronger than any of them individually. But the fight's math changes completely. He can no longer commit fully to finishing Rengoku, because doing so opens him up to being flanked. That hesitation, even a small one, is exactly the kind of opening Rengoku's whole fighting style is built to punish. The most plausible outcome isn't Akaza's death. It's Akaza deciding, the same way he does in the actual ending of the series, that the fight isn't winnable anymore and retreating before sunrise, except this time, Rengoku is still standing when he does it. Wounded, badly, possibly permanently, but alive. Here's where this stops being a simple win. Surviving doesn't mean surviving clean. Rengoku takes real damage in the actual fight. Before help arrives, his arm is already crushed by that point in canon. A version where he lives is a version where he's dealing with a serious, possibly permanent injury to his sword arm. For a Hashira, that's not a minor inconvenience. His entire identity is built around being the Corps' most dependable frontline fighter. So the most honest version of this what if isn't Rengoku walking away as if nothing happened. It's Rengoku surviving into a long, difficult recovery, the celebratory ending fans want, immediately complicated by the reality that this fight nearly killed him and might have changed what he's physically capable of going forward. That tension is actually more interesting than a clean win. It keeps him a real character instead of turning him into a trophy the story just gets to keep. Fact check on the emotional stakes here, because this is where the what if gets genuinely powerful. Rengoku's father, Shinjiro, is a former Flame Hashira himself, who broke down after his wife's death and essentially gave up, drinking, distant, dismissive of his son's dedication to a life he considers pointless. Their entire relationship throughout the actual story is defined by Kyojuro trying to reach a father who's already checked out. In the canon timeline, Shinjiro learns about his son's death after the fact, and it's part of what eventually starts to pull him out of his despair, grief becoming the thing that finally makes him confront who he'd let himself become. In this timeline, he gets something different, a phone call, so to speak, that his son nearly died. Not a eulogy, a warning. That's a very different kind of wake-up call. Instead of guilt over what he lost, it's fear about what he almost lost, with the chance to actually act on it, while Kyojuro is still alive to see it. The most plausible version of this arc has Shinjiro visiting his son during recovery for the first time in years, and the reconciliation that canon gives us only in fragments after Kyojuro's death happens instead, messily, while both of them are still around for it. Now the harder question. What does this do to Tanjiro? Rengoku's death is one of the defining emotional beats of Tanjiro's entire journey. It's the moment the story stops being winnable through pure effort and kindness alone. And it's a huge part of why Tanjiro pushes himself as hard as he does afterward. Take that away, and you have to ask what replaces it. The likely answer isn't that Tanjiro suddenly has an easier time. It's that his motivation shifts from grief to something closer to urgency, without loss attached to it yet. He still watched Rengoku nearly die. He still understands exactly how outmatched the core is against the upper ranks. He just gets to carry that lesson forward with Rengoku alive to keep teaching him, rather than as a memory he's trying to live up to. That's a meaningfully different Tanjiro, still driven, but driven by an ongoing relationship instead of a debt to someone who's already gone. Some of the story's most quietly devastating later moments, the ones built on missing him, simply don't happen the same way. This is the biggest structural change, so let's walk through it carefully. In canon, the final battle against Muzan is fought without Rengoku. The core goes into its most desperate fight, already down one of its strongest members, and that absence is felt throughout. If he survives Mugen Train, even with a recovering arm, the most plausible version has him back in the field by the time the final war begins. Likely adapted to fighting with his injury, the way several other characters adapt around their own limitations over the course of the story. Having Rengoku present changes the math of that final battle meaningfully. He's consistently written as one of the 2 or 3 strongest Hashira in the entire core. His presence alone likely means fewer Hashira deaths overall. Someone else who might have died buying time instead gets backup they never had in canon. The trade-off the story would have to make is narrative, not tactical. Part of what makes the final arc as devastating as it is comes from watching characters fight and die without their strongest ally already lost to remind them what's at stake. A surviving Rengoku doesn't just change who lives. It changes the entire emotional texture of the ending. One more thread worth pulling. Akaza's backstory is one of the most tragic in the entire series. A talented young man destroyed by grief and turned into a demon by Muzan while he was already at his lowest point. Rengoku's refusal to become a demon and the reasoning behind it visibly rattles Akaza in canon. It's one of the only times we see a crack in his conviction that becoming a demon was the right choice. If Rengoku survives and the two of them cross paths again later in the story, there's a plausible version where that crack widens, not necessarily into a full change of heart, Akaza's own history makes a full redemption difficult to justify. But a second encounter, with Rengoku alive to have it, is exactly the kind of scene this story tends to write, and it's very possible it ends with a version of Akaza's actual final battle that lands slightly differently, because the person who first made him doubt himself is standing right there again. So does Rengoku surviving make the story better? Honestly, probably not. Not in the way that matters most for storytelling. His death is what makes the second half of Demon Slayer land the way it does. It's the moment the audience learns the rules of this world for real. Strength and kindness aren't enough on their own, and the story is willing to take away characters it clearly loves. But emotionally, as a fan, a version where Shinjiro gets to fix things with his son while he's still alive, where Tanjiro gets a mentor instead of a memory, where the final war has one more of its strongest fighters standing at the end, that's a timeline a lot of us would take in a heartbeat, even knowing exactly what we'd be trading away to get it. That's the what if. Let me know in the comments which part of this timeline you'd want most, or which character's what if you want covered next. Subscribe if you want more Demon Slayer deep dives, and I'll see you in the next one.